I think Labour are incapable of making up for their previous condemnations of President Trump.
Now, there are recent reports that Keir Starmer's UK is refusing to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. This is one of Trump's first actions as president. Do you think this is an insult to Donald Trump?
So, I mean, I have great sympathy with Donald Trump wanting to rename it the Gulf of America because Mar-a-Lago overlooks it, apart from anything else. He wants to put America first, make America great again. And of course, he's got issues with Mexico, who, as far as I can see, have made as much effort as the French do to prevent illegal migration out of their country. And so I completely understand why, President Trump would wish to rename it. Of course, naming a geographical territory which belongs to no one requires a change in the way international convention works. And I mean, we've all grown up calling it the Gulf of Mexico. Why the British government decided to make any kind of statement on it is beyond me. They could have just let it ride. No one was inviting them to, go one way or the other. But if he wants to call it the Gulf of America, and if that assists President Trump, I'm for all for it. Let's do it. Let's call it the Gulf of America.
More broadly, what do you think about Starmer's attitude towards Trump? Do you think that the Labour diplomacy has been good so far when dealing with the new president?
I think Labour are incapable of making up for their previous condemnations of President Trump. And even after, I mean, we all know about the vitriolic language used, the denouncing language used by Lammy, Starmer, and others, just about everyone in the Labour administration, including, of course, canvassing for the Democrats during the presidential election. But even after President Trump won the election, Starmer was hurrying off to Paris, hurrying off to Germany, discussing how it would be that European Union and the United Kingdom could somehow survive the Trump presidency, sending very clear signals repeatedly to President Trump that actually his ascendancy to the presidency is not welcome in the United Kingdom. And that sends perhaps the clearest message of all that Starmer is not open to President Trump's image or President Trump's agenda. And so I think Trump will be looking at the United Kingdom thinking, Labour ain't no mates of the United States of America.
Donald Trump in the last few days has executed a series of executive orders, including opening drilling and gas in Alaska, banning DEI from federal government, shutting down basically the southern border, declaring a national emergency, ending birthright citizenship, all of these things. Do you think that, can you just contrast that with what's going on in the UK at the moment? Are you quite jealous of having President Trump here in America?
I think you know the answer. I mean, I wish that we had our own um, uh, governance agenda along those lines. Everything I've said in the last 4 or 5 years accords completely with the 100 odd executive orders that President Trump signed on his first day. And DEI is terrible. Progressive discrimination is nothing more than racism in reverse. Open borders undermines a country's very existence. So that has to stop. The drive towards net zero is from an energy perspective, it's deeply debilitating to a country, particularly the United Kingdom. But it's economically emasculating, and everything he's done, I endorse. I wish Starmer would look across the Atlantic and realize, as time will make him realize, if he hasn't already got it, that the United Kingdom needs to follow the United States. Otherwise, what we're going to see is an even faster growing US, an even more attractive United States of America, with a further exodus of millionaires, bright young British people, and capital from the United Kingdom to the United States. The world, as we now know, is a very fluid place for expertise and for capital, and it will go to where it finds its best home. And we've driven it out of the UK already through really bad set of policies, not just with Labour Party, but even before the Labour Party won the election. You know, we've been following an agenda which is deeply damaging to the United Kingdom. And Trump is showing us the way. He is showing that what we've been doing for the last 27 years, kind of liberal global approach to domestic governance is not the way to run a country. He's shown us how to run a country, and we better get on that bandwagon, or we're going to be wiped out.
Isn't there an argument, though, that Britain should try and be more independent from the United States? Historically, particularly over the last 30 years with Tony Blair and so on, some people argue that we have basically been a lapdog to the United States and that we've been far too compliant and willing to be a kind of satellite power. I know someone like Enoch Powell from the 1950s, he argued very strongly that America essentially was an enemy almost to Britain and who didn't have our best interests at heart. When you look at the Suez Canal crisis, is a great example of where America abandoned us. So I know that you're a Brexiteer, you believe in sovereignty. What about this argument that we shouldn't just be a satellite of the United States, we should have our own independent foreign policy, for example?
I completely agree that we should have our own independent foreign policy, and I hope what I've just said about the Trump's presidency and his agenda isn't confused with a desire to just be American. That's not what I'm saying. I think what President Trump is doing for the United States is putting the US first, and there will be pain in that for the United Kingdom. But what we've got to recognize, and this is on his domestic policy as opposed to foreign policy, that if we don't mimic his domestic policy in the United Kingdom, both economically, culturally, regulatorily, energy wise, if we don't mimic it, we're going to be taken to the cleaners economically because, as I say, capital and bright young individuals, well-educated people, they'll all flock to the US because it'll offer them a much better home, prosperity, security. Their progeny will have a much brighter future, and so on. So this isn't about me saying I love President Trump, so the UK should just do whatever President Trump wants. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying his agenda is the right agenda for America. It will cause us real pain unless we adopt the same agenda. It also happens to be an agenda for which I've been campaigning for the last 4 or 5 years. But in foreign policy, I completely agree with you. We've been lapdogs to the United States of America for far too long. We should never have followed the US into the Iraq war, in my view, or into Afghanistan. I think they were misadventures. The Libyan adventure, which came under Obama with Cameron, was doubly daft because we'd already seen the damage Iraq and Afghanistan had done to the Middle East, but we followed President Obama into Libya, and Libya now is a failed state. And all these foreign interventions that we've made with the Americans, including, frankly, our support, unquestioning support of Zelensky and Biden in Ukraine, I think is bad for British geopolitical position and our foreign policy. Our foreign policy also needs to be dictated by what is in our interests. We've put a cloak, just as an example, I don't want to get too drawn into the Ukraine-Russian debate, but we've put a cloak of virtual sort of moral correctitude around Ukraine, as if the Ukrainian battle is beyond reproach. And Zelensky must get whatever armaments he wants, whatever support he wants to do whatever he wishes to do. And that is no way to run a foreign policy. What we've got to think is, right, what's in our interest in Ukraine? How do we make sure, if, for example, we want their grain and we want trade with Ukraine, how do we preserve that? How do we do what's right for the British people? How do we also ensure that Russia isn't encouraged to, frankly, invade another country after this? When you've married up all our own interests, then you form the foreign policy directive. And what we've done in Ukraine is completely wrong.
There's a long history of US foreign policy contradicting or conflicting with British interests. You can go all the way back to the Revolutionary War, the 1812, Venezuela crisis in the 1880s, the Second World War, and so on. What do you think should be the British position towards President Trump and beyond over the next 4 years? Should we be aiming for a trade deal? What kind of policies do you think Keir Starmer should do to try and work in favour of British interests?
People keep confusing, in my view, trade deals with international trade, and they're not synonymous. All you need in order to trade internationally is a product which other countries and companies in other countries and people in other countries wish to buy. And the key component in getting that right is producing stuff in the United Kingdom to a high quality and cost effectively. And at the moment, what we've got, Stephen, forget about trade deals for a moment. What we've got is a regulatory and taxation system that makes it extremely challenging for British manufacturers of goods to actually produce stuff that the world wishes to buy. We're fantastic on financial services, though even our financial services industry is now on its back foot for reasons we can discuss if you wish to. But what we've got to really concentrate on in the United Kingdom is making stuff that other countries want to buy. And we can only do that through domestic policy. We've got to deregulate in the way that we discussed in an earlier segment. Deregulate, cut taxes, reduce the cost of energy, liberate British businesses, so the businessmen can then determine how best to produce their goods and how to make them cost effective and sell them at a margin which makes sense for them. When those basic components are in place, then we can talk about fine tuning our arrangements on with other countries as far as trade goes, for streamlining it through a trade deal. Actually, the US is one country with which we don't massively need a trade deal, because the 300 odd billion pounds worth of goods that the trade that we have, most of that is financial services. 60% of that is financial services. And the other thing that's really interesting about our relationship with the US is that we think we run a trade surplus with the US, and they think they run a trade surplus with us because we count our numbers slightly differently. So we have a very happy arrangement with the US as far as trade is concerned. The key thing for me, for the United Kingdom, is domestic policy changes. That's what we've got to do to make this country successful. And we've got to do that unashamedly with British interests in mind. And the current agenda, as I've mentioned before, of this liberal global order, high regulations, net zero, open borders, all of that is killing British industry at every level.
And just finally, Donald Trump has started his deportation program. Within the last couple of days, there's been immigration raids across the United States. Is this something that Keir Starmer should be learning from as well? Those mass deportations should be taking place in Britain.
Every single illegal migrant in the United Kingdom, and I understand there are around 1.2 million. Of course, we can't know for sure because they're here illegally. So, we can only rely on the statistics and estimates given to us by government. But every single person in the United Kingdom who is here illegally should be detained and, if possible, deported. And if they can't be deported, then some other mechanism should be found to either repatriate them or to leave them incarcerated. No one should be allowed to break into the United Kingdom and stay here free of charge, and indeed, in many, many cases, at the cost of our generosity.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the GBN America YouTube channel.